Hey, everybody, and welcome to The Brand Called You. So, listen, I'm going to admit a guilty pleasure. I love lying in bed at night and watching Netflix series about murder mysteries. I love those series where you're watching somebody trace the history of their uncle who bludgeoned their aunt. And I mean, I'm a voyeur. What can I say? But the thing is, I get to turn it off at night and go back to my little middle class life. But that isn't the case for our guest today, who I'm super excited about, an attorney whose name is Jeremy Shockett. Jeremy's been a lawyer in New York City during the best and the worst times for more than 30 years. And he has one of the most fascinating resumes I've ever seen. I mean, he's been down and dirty in New York when it was really a gritty city. He's worked both in the private and the public sector, working on everything from prosecuting corrupt cops to COVID response to cybersecurity to working against violent gangs. I mean, you name it, he's done it. But today he is a litigator and a trial attorney with the firm Anderson Kill in New York City. Now, I can't help but notice the irony in that name, Kill, because it turns out that he actually began his career prosecuting serial killers. And Jeremy, I know you have much more to your resume. I hope we get to it, but I thought it would be fun to start with that because just to appeal to my voyeuristic nature, I am so fascinated to hear about that earliest part of your career to begin with. Do you mind starting with something like that?
Not at all. And thank you for having me. And I must tell you, it is a coincidence that I am at a firm called Anderson Kill. Uh,
And that your name is Shockett.
and my name is Shocket. I love my last name. Uh, it actually means ritual butcher. And until you started talking about serial killers, I forgot that my last name actually meant ritual butcher.
I mean, I
I
used
don't
to
think
do
it
it.
meant human butcher. I think it meant animal butcher, but you know,
Yeah. No,
but that's it.
I knew a dentist named Dr. Borer. So sometimes these things happen, but I think a good place to start. I mean, you are in the private sector now, but for most of your career, for 30 years of it, you really did public service. And I always wonder, when you have a choice, why was that the first thing you reached for?
Well,
And yeah.
that's a great question, and my family asked me that a lot. Why would I go into public service in a place like the Bronx 30 years ago, from my nice home in Miami where I was born and raised? And it's a really, really good feeling to wake up in the morning and do the right thing and know that you're just gonna look for justice. And you don't always get that making a big paycheck, and I don't begrudge anyone for doing anything different. It suited me at the time, and it suited me for almost 30 years in public service, getting to do the right thing, helping people. I'll tell you one quick little story. Early in my career, I was investigating it was a murder, and the murder had been caught, and the victim, he was a young man, he had a family, and I went to his family's home and I sat down with him in their living room. And they lived in a rough neighborhood and it was very sparse. And I went into their home in my suit and sat down at their table. They offered me tea. And we had a nice long chat about what we were going to try to do to get justice for their son. At the end of it, I said, "Do you have any questions?" And the mom and the sister looked at me and they said, "We just really appreciate you coming to our home." And they looked at me as a big government official. In my head, I was a young person, but to them, I was some big highfalutin government attorney. And they appreciated the fact that I went to their home and I met them where they lived, and I got to see the pictures of their son and their brother on the mantle. And it gave me the ability to go into court and make a really compelling and empathetic argument on behalf of the young man who had been killed. Uh, that's a good feeling to do just about every day. And I'd be lying if I told you every day is perfect, because there's no job where every day is perfect, but the highs definitely outweighed the lows. Does that answer your question?
It does. I mean, look, we probably are approximately in the same age category. I started my career as a storyteller working with sexually abused kids in the Bronx, with women who had been battered by their husbands, with homeless shelters. And I think it's important to provide context for listeners to understand that the New York of 30 years ago when you started was not
Mhm.
the New York of today. And I remember, I would be sent into these areas to work with in the worst conceivable conditions you could imagine. And I remember thinking to myself that most of my friends and most of my relatives had no idea what life was really like, that there is such a dark side. I was seeing things that were so painful and I couldn't even convey them or communicate them. And I imagine in your role as attorney and prosecutor for the state, you saw things that you maybe wish you hadn't, or I mean, do you remember that New York, that the
I, I,
context?
I'll give you two examples. And the first one is a numbers example. And the second one is a story example. The numbers example is in 1994, when I started as a young prosecutor, there were, I think, approximately 1,000 murders a year in just the county of the Bronx. So that's almost three a day. By the time I left, there were approximately 60 murders per year, maybe 70, maybe 80. I know it was under 100. So if you think about two or three murders a day, down to one every five or one a week, those numbers are startlingly different. And in 1994, I'm not even talking about all the robberies and the shootings and the grand larcenies and the assaults and the rapes. The numbers were off the charts. And that's to give you a feel of like the real grittiness and the numbers. But I'll give you another example. So I one of my first murder scenes I ever went to was, I'll give you a little background. As a young prosecutor, we had a unique initiative in the Bronx where anytime there was a murder, a lawyer, a prosecutor would respond to the scene to make sure that it was being done properly, if they needed any legal help, if they needed a
Okay.
search warrant, etc. Okay. So I used to go and they would send the young prosecutors and I might go three times a night, maybe four times a night. It was crazy. It was before MapQuest, it was before cell phones. And 3 in the morning in the middle of January, it's 10 degrees out. I get a call saying there's been a murder. And I think it was a park called St. Mary's Park. And I drove up there with my paper map and I pulled up in front and there was nobody there. Not a soul. And I got out of my car, didn't know what to do. I went to a payphone and I took out a quarter or a dime, whatever it was. And I called the precinct and I said, "Where's everybody? I'm here." And he said, "Look up." So I looked up the steps. And sure enough, at the top of the steps, there were these lights. It looked like an alien had landed. So I trudged up the 100 feet of steps. And as I was trudging, I started to smell something. And it was the smell of death. When I got to the top, there were four police cars, two pointing at each other, grass. And in the middle of the grass was a body face down with a bullet hole in the head. And I had never seen a dead body before. And I walked up and it was freezing. All the windows were up in the cars. And I walked over to the first police car, knocked on the window. The guy rolled it down an inch. I said, "Who's the boss?" He said, "My colleague in the next seat's the boss." I said, "Hi." I said, "I'm Jeremy Shockett. I'm the assistant DA." He said, "Okay." I said, "Just so you know, it's my first murder scene." And he added some color, but he said, "Big whoopee doo." And his colleague in the back said, "Kid, get in the car." And I got in the back of the car and I did my work. It was so normalized to
Yeah.
have dead bodies. And I never really got over it. Like it's been 26 years since that, maybe even 29 years since that day. Uh, I remember the smells. I remember the feels. I remember where everybody was. I remember the walk up the steps. Uh, However, I did get desensitized to it a bit. It didn't keep me up at night. I could go home and go to sleep, but the feelings stayed with me
Yeah.
forever because it was a
What,
human, always a human.
yeah. What got to you the most of all your cases? Which is the one that haunts you to this day?
I it, I will tell it's pretty graphic, and you can stop me if
No,
I'm
I'm a
too
voyeur, so go
graphic.
on.
No, it's pretty sad. So one of the most notorious cases I prosecuted was two men were the defendants, killed a family of five. and they went from home to home to home and killed them. And a 13-year-old boy, the nephew, walked in on it. And he had just come from school and he was wearing his backpack. And when he was found by the police, he was found sitting on his bed with his hands covering his eyes and a bullet hole through his head. And the bullet had caught in his hand, just resting there. And he was leaned over like he was asleep. And that image to this day is haunting. We convicted both men. They got life terms, as they should, but they tortured people, they murdered people, and they were willing to kill a 13-year-old little boy.
For what reason?
He had walked in on it. They were killing the parents.
For robbery? Or?
It was the victim in the case had had a medical malpractice settlement for millions of dollars, and they thought he kept the money under his bed. He kept it in real estate, and they tortured him and tried to tell him to give it up, and they had to kill everybody who knew it. So they did.
I mean,
that'll stick with you.
I have to say, I've been on the other end, and the bureaucracy and inequity that I witnessed at that time, I wondered how you dealt with it. For example, what happened was I was living in a co-op building, and it was a duplex, and the owners had sort of basically turned the upstairs, what should have been the balcony and one bedroom in the other downstairs apartment, into its own apartment. So in order for me to get to the apartment, I had to walk up the stairwell, take the elevator and walk up on the outside of, you understand. I couldn't go through the apartment. And I chanced upon a man in the stairwell, and I just innocently said, "Can I help you?" And within a couple seconds, he was trying to strangle me. And I tried to run away, and he pulled me back. And I said to myself, this is the moment that I'm going to die. And I suddenly went into some deep survival mode, which I think I'd been practicing my whole life as the child of a Holocaust survivor. I think I had practiced outwitting Nazis anyway, I somehow talked my way out of it. I convinced him he was cool. And it turns out he was caught. He came back for his paycheck and got caught. But it turned out he had been arrested 14 times for armed robbery and was given a job right out of prison in this building without any supervision. And, I tried to go to a few lawyers, and they said there's really no recourse. I mean, it was just kind of the Wild West in those days. And I felt as a victim, but also for these, so I don't know, it was, by the way, Linda Fairstein was my DA at the time.
Oh, there you go.
And I got a chance years later to thank her for her compassion. And she was, like you, it had meant a lot to her that somebody had remembered her kindness. But I just wondered if you had to encounter just, oodles and oodles of, of these kinds of inequities and bureaucratic crazinesses. And
it didn't happen very often. And I'll tell you why. Because we were assistant DAs. And as I got more senior, my title tended to improve. I was a deputy, then I was a chief, then I was an executive, then I was the chief executive. And when I walked into a room, I generally got what I wanted, which helped, the cases. But I always understood that the person maybe next to me wasn't getting that kind of treatment. And I was very big on stepping in and making sure that everybody got treated fairly. I'll give you one example. I had a witness of mine. He was testifying for me, and he had a drug problem, and he was in rehab. He had a rough life. And in rehab, he saw some of his fellow rehab patients committing crimes. They were passing counterfeit money. And he told the rehab chief, the boss, he said, "Hey, these guys are doing it." Well, that's called snitching. And the rehab guy threw him out of the rehab because he was telling people that they were committing crimes. So I called the rehab guy and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, we can't have snitches here." And I said, "But they're committing a crime, right? He's doing the right thing." And he would have none of it. Well, I didn't get mad very often. I have a very high threshold for anger. And I got really mad. And I had a young colleague with me, and they were watching, and they were scared. And the guy apologized and put him back in rehab. But that young man if I wasn't there for him, he would
Yeah,
have been kicked out on the street to do drugs, to go back into the life he was really, really, really trying to avoid. And, I took it upon myself. And here's the other thing. So I'm in private practice now. And when I tell people I'm in private practice, I'm a white collar defense attorney. I defend criminals. I mean, that's
right.
really, it's terrible. Well, I love my criminally adjacent clients. I do, because many of them, whether or not they committed a crime, and many of them didn't, but they're being ground down by the system that I used to be a
Yes,
part of. And I feel
yes,
like I can help them navigate
yeah,
this, maybe get them a good deal, maybe convince the DA to do the right thing at the end of the day, maybe convince the DA or the judge or the jury that they really didn't commit a crime. And you should show mercy and leniency. The flip side is the people who are involved in this have to live this, and they go to court every month. And
yeah,
when's my case going to end? And I'm spending money, and my
yeah.
life's resources are going down the drain because I'm fighting the system. It can be heartbreaking. It's
Yeah.
difficult.
Speaking of defense, I'm the daughter of a long line of scientists. I even have an uncle whose license plate says E does not equal MC squared. And it doesn't, I do not understand why there is not more active defense on the part of, for example, you get serial killers or you get murderers. Why they are not using brain MRIs as defense these days? Because it's so obvious that there is a real problem with brain function in so many of these cases, even in child pornography or in rape. I mean, it's been shown that there are abnormalities, and I wonder if that is an up and coming defense that people are going to start to use now.
So, and I come from a long 25 years of being a prosecutor. It's kind of easy to say that someone has a brain abnormality and therefore they're acting in a particular way. The
Mhm.
problem becomes legally, the standard is, do you know right from wrong? And can you act on it? So if you know what you're doing is wrong and yet you still do it, it the law doesn't take into account, well, it's because you were abused or because you had used drugs or because you had a traumatic history.
But like, for example, we know with Ozempic now, right, that you're not, even though you know that you're going to get fat or get diabetes if you keep eating sugar, you still keep eating it. And we know that it's a function of the brain to give you, to compel you to eat when you know it's not good for you. We also know that you have certain regions of the brain that compel you to behave in a certain way, even though you know better. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying, like, when will that be a defense?
So I think sometimes it is used as a defense that I had no choice, because almost every crime, you have to have some intent. So you have to consciously do something, either choosing it, doing it recklessly, or negligently. That's crime, intentional murder. They call it intentional murder for a reason. It's intentional.
Yeah.
If you could prove it wasn't intentional because I had no choice but to murder, that is a defense. It's also going to put you in a psychiatric institution for probably the rest of your life. Maybe that's better. I don't know. It's
Well,
probably not going to get you off. Does that make
I guess
sense?
what I'm really asking, I guess I'm asking a much larger question, which is, with the new research and neuroscientific studies, all the new body of work that's coming out now on brain chemistry and function, do you think that it will change the way our law views criminality and
It,
the lens by which we view it?
it might, but I don't see it happening anytime soon, because I don't think most of the public and lawmakers are ready to absolve people of what seemingly is independent actions by blaming the brain, even though the brain is what makes us do these independent actions. I just don't see them. The legislatures will have to change that. And there's been obviously a lot of backlash to lowering, uh, criminal responsibility for certain crimes, especially in New York and California and Washington, blah, blah, blah. So I don't see them jumping at the chance to lower penalties or lower criminality. Does that make sense?
I mean, having lived in the Netherlands for many years, where they treat, for example, a child who's 21 is still considered a minor. A friend of mine's child robbed a grocery store, and he was put into a rehabilitation apartment with three others. And
Hmm.
for a year, he and his family had to go into therapy by law, and they slowly rehabilitated him back into the culture with no record. Now, that in a million years wouldn't happen here. And I guess I'm just wondering, I always think, is it because we're such an individualistic culture that we like to blame the individual versus taking collective responsibility for somebody's behavior? Or do you think there'll be any kind of reform when it has to do with rehabilitation? Because it seems to me to
So,
make sense.
so I have a really good example that's it's not widely known. It's a version of restorative justice.
Hmm.
And in New York State, if the district attorney consents, so it's not mandatory, but if the district attorney consents, even on a very violent crime, except for murder, you can do a form of restorative justice where the case might even be dismissed.
Wow.
And the victim cooperates, the victim gets services, social services, because usually these are cycles. It's
Yes.
most victims of crime tend to be future criminals because they go through trauma,
Right.
and they're basically two sides of the same coin often.
Right.
Um, so the restorative justice program that I was involved in, that really the DA has to take a leap of faith. You know, the district attorneys are elected, and they're going to say, "Oh, I'm letting a violent criminal out of jail." Well, I'm letting a violent criminal out of jail because the success rate is 93%,
Wow.
and the victim approves it, and the victim, the
Yeah.
odds of recidivism are almost zero when the victim goes through it. So you get job training, you get psychiatric training, you get all these wonderful things, but it's very labor intensive and time intensive and risk for elected officials. Now, I worked for a couple of district attorneys who were willing to do it. And in New York City, you know, you take real small swaths of crime, and with the right people and the right resources, you can do it. And we found it to be incredibly successful. Uh, you know, we'd have graduation ceremonies for defendants who went through the program for a year and a half, and they would walk out different people. They would literally be different people. And once in a while, they would have a restorative circle with the victim at
Yeah.
the end of it to
Wow.
kind of, you know, in the playground, you were supposed to shake hands with the kid who you were
Yeah.
punching. Well,
Yeah.
this was like controlled shaking hands with the kid.
I'm all in favor of that. I mean, I lived years ago, I lived in Sullivan County, New York. And I remember that 90% of the local population worked for the prisons up there. You know, Son of Sam was
Mhm.
up there, the Zodiac Killer. And I remember that it was very much that Sullivan County was very much in favor of more prison time because there was such an economic incentive there.
Mhm.
And I wonder how you feel about, that kind of partnership.
Well, New York State. So I was one of the things you talked about in my resume. I was deputy secretary for public safety for 2.5 years, and in my portfolio were the New York State Corrections Department, which is all the prisons. And New York State in the last 20 years has reduced their prison footprint by, I think, 60%. And they've actually closed prisons, closed them, not just lowered the population. Every year or every 2 years, they close 3 prisons.
Why?
And this because the population is dropping from prison,
Okay.
and they don't want them to be the economic drivers of Sullivan County or Onondaga County or wherever. And if you look in this year's budget, there's the authority, I think, to close 3 more prisons. And every year for the last 15, 20 years, they've been closing more prisons. And the local communities push back really, really hard because they are the economic drivers. And part of it is attrition of employees. They age out and there's fewer employees, so there's fewer need for the prisons. I, I'm in favor of shrinking the footprint if you don't have the demand. Why would you have prisons sitting empty? I mean,
Do
it's
they
good.
commission, are there private
No,
prisons? No,
no
so that,
private prisons in New York State.
okay.
No. They're
Tell me
actually
about
just reducing the population.
why, what, there's less criminals?
Yes, yes, crime has gone down. Remember we talked about 1,000 murders versus 100?
Yeah.
Well, that's 900 murderers who are not committing murder. That's
Why? Why?
Well, that's a much bigger, longer question for why crime has gone down. Some people say, well, the laws were very strong. Other people would say economics have improved. Other people would say, well, society and resources are being given and there's less reason to commit crimes. It's 100 reasons, 100, maybe 500, maybe 1,000.
Well, you worked during COVID, you worked for the state. And I think that the state saw a huge rise in violence during that period. Am I right?
Uh, you can define huge differently, but there was a significant percentage rise in just about every crime, except auto theft.
Really?
Over, yeah, because nobody was driving, so there was nobody to steal for at least the first 6 months. Uh,
Interesting.
but but those, so the crime spiked, and when I say spiked, it didn't spike to 1994 levels. It didn't
Mhm.
spike to 2000 levels, but
Mhm.
it was higher than pre-COVID. Definitely was higher, and it's
Yeah.
slowly going back down.
Yeah. So let me ask you, when you worked for the state in this capacity, I believe you were also responsible for making sure that elections were run smoothly and legally and so forth. Is that correct?
So that's a small overstatement. I was the co-chair of the New York Cybersecurity Advisory Board, where the Board of Elections, like I wasn't ensuring elections were run smoothly and safely and competently, but if there was a cyber event involving the
Yeah.
Board of Elections, if it happened, we were one of the prime resources to help them
Wow.
work through if it
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. So, any thoughts for the upcoming election in terms of cybersecurity? Is the threat like tenfold, or are we better at it? How do you feel we're?
So my personal opinion is that there's two different things about cybersecurity. The first is the actual cybersecurity, is what you think of. Is somebody going to get hacked? Somebody going to change a vote? I think the odds of that are outrageously small.
Mhm.
The second piece is uh, misinformation through cyber warfare, uh, creating events that would affect elections through cyber warfare.
Creating
So
events?
not so, for instance, if the electrical grid was shut down a week before the election,
Yes.
that would affect the election, but it wouldn't change the physical vote.
Right.
Misinformation campaigns, AI generated content now,
Mhm.
uh, I think really has the potential to do a lot of damage. If you saw a presidential candidate saying truly outrageous things, sounding like the candidate. You watch them on video like you're watching me. They may have all the mannerisms of the candidate, and they say truly outrageous things which you don't agree with. Well, you're not going to vote for them, even if it's completely AI generated. And even if you're told later that was AI generated, the image is still burned in your head. And I think that's going to happen. We're going to see it a lot. And we're seeing it kind of crudely a little bit. People in their basements are doing it. Uh, they're making crude political AI generated videos, but they're going to get better when the nation states get involved. They're going to be, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. You're just not as a lay person.
Yeah, and again, getting back to the brain, I mean, we're also kind of not equipped to discern between truth and, fact and lies at this point.
Oh.
And as an attorney who goes to trial like you do, you must be acutely aware of how the facts often are just one small part of winning a case, right?
Yeah, I mean, as a former prosecutor, to me, it was about the facts. It really was, but there's a lot of storytelling that gets involved in it, and there's recency and primacy and repeating things, emphasizing different parts of a phrase, of a picture, of a video. It can be very, very effective, and in my career as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney dealing with juries, a lot of it is the personal connection you make with the jurors, because in state court, you get to choose the jurors. In
Yes.
federal court, you don't necessarily get to talk to them directly, but you still get to choose them. And in state court, I can sit and talk to a juror 3 feet away and really, really either make a connection or learn that they hate me. And if they hate me, Maybe they seem on paper to be the best juror ever, former police officer, whatever it is, father's a cop, but
Mm.
this juror hates me. She doesn't like my tie, or she doesn't like my shoes, or she didn't like a turn of phrase I used and she made a face. I'm not picking her because she's never going to listen to me.
Yeah.
So I have picked jurors. I picked a juror once with tattoos from the neck all the way down, all the way to the hands. And my colleagues were like, "What are you doing? You're a prosecutor. You're picking this, seemingly very liberal, wild juror." I was like, "They love me. This juror looked me right in the eye and loved me."
Oh, you're the first person that has explained that to me, because I know it's called voir dire, right? Where you
It
kind
is
of
voir
educate.
dire. Yep.
So I always thought, lawyers chose based on their the jurors' political leanings or their past history, but I never until this minute realized that it's really their relationship with you, the prosecutor. That's very interesting.
I'm gonna tell you two things. So as a young prosecutor, I did jury trials, and in the beginning, my cases were difficult and not very serious, and I lost a bunch of them. It's okay. Nobody counted it against me. I didn't get demoted because I lost, and I was picking jurors based on their resumes. They seemed like they were good. They seemed it, and it almost didn't matter I wasn't good at it yet. And as I got more experience and I got more comfortable, I would talk to jurors and I would pick them in part. Listen, if they said to me, I don't think crime is real, I don't think anybody should go to jail. Well, yeah, I'm not picking them, but nobody says that unless they just want to get off the jury. But you can have a conversation with them. For instance, the tattoo artist, I said to him, "What's the favorite tattoo that you put on somebody?" And he looked at me, he was so happy to ask that question. And he said, "Oh, it's Superman. I love doing Superman." I'm like, "Oh, that's super cool." And he said to me, "Do you have any tattoos?" And I said, "No, but I'm willing to listen." He loved that. So I had a professor once. He was a professor of physics. And I said to him, "I'm not going to know what you're going to say. I'm not going to understand the words you're going to use. But what was your dissertation?" And he told me. I have no idea the words that came out of his mouth. He's very interesting stuff. And I said, "Wow, that sounds amazing. I cannot relate because I'm a lawyer." And he just smiled and was so happy. And I picked him. Now, you can't do that every time, and maybe it works for me and not for others, but I've spoken to dozens and dozens of colleagues who talk about making that connection with people.
Yeah.
When you're a lawyer, when you're a salesperson, when you're a business person, when you're anybody, part of the key is making a connection with the person so that they listen to you,
Well,
right?
you're actually employing an old storytelling strategy. Like when I work with corporate people, what and this is quite interesting. If you ask somebody a direct question, there's a part of the brain that is for expectation that like activates, and they'll say what they think you want to hear. If you trick them by saying something that's completely, about something else, you're much more likely to get the truth, which is kind of what you're doing. And I also think you have a very heightened emotional IQ. You're highly empathetic, which I see now fuels your work regardless of which side you're on,
Mhm.
prosecutor or defense. And I think that must be a key to your success, right? You're kind of reading people emotionally, not
I,
just intellectually.
I appreciate you saying that, and I will tell you that most of my clients, whether they were the victims of crimes or witnesses or people who were charged with crimes, usually it's the worst moment in their life.
Mhm.
It's the worst, and they have lost sleep over it. They're obsessed with it, and after they sit with me for 30 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, they usually give me a hug at the end, whether I've given them good news or bad. It doesn't matter what I've said to them. I just tell them the truth, and they say to me, "Tonight's the first night I'm going to be able to sleep in a month." And that
Oh,
is so gratifying, and they mean it. And then they text me the next day and they go, "Thank you for talking with me and taking the time." Now, I'm working for them. That's my job. But
yeah.
that for them, they're not looking at me like I'm doing my job. They're looking at me like, "Wow, this guy's listening to me and he's answering my questions." And I've given terrible news. I have given the worst news to people you can ever imagine. And most of the time, even if they're screaming, I very young, very young attorney, I gave a family terrible news that I was
What?
not going to be able to prosecute the person who killed their sister. There was no crime. There was no crime. The person killed the sister. It was an accident. There was no negligence. There was no recklessness. There was no intent. It was an accident. And I had to explain it to them, and it made no sense to them. They did not like it. And they yelled at me for half an hour. And when we were done, I said, call me anytime, ask me anything you want. I'm really sorry. And as they walked out, the mom gave me a hug. The aunt gave me a hug. The father gave me a hug.
Yeah.
They they got it. And I felt terrible. I hated doing it, but
Have you ever seen an almost inhuman-like act of forgiveness on the part of a victim?
uh I, I've had some forgiving victims, but I wouldn't go I wouldn't say any of them were a real surprise. I'm not going to say someone just completely, forgave someone for doing a heinous crime. I've had people say, don't ask for the maximum.
Hmm.
That's an act of forgiveness. It's not absolution, but it's some forgiveness. Uh, the serial killer case with the family of
Can
five.
I ask, who was the serial killer, by the way, that you prosecuted?
There were a couple of them. One was Luis Garcia, one was Jose Cosme Pizarro, and the third guy who I feel terrible, I can't remember his name. He murdered a couple young women and committed sexual acts against them in the 80s, and then he confessed to me in the 90s. He just needed to unburden himself, and he confessed, and he stayed in jail forever. I'm blanking on his
What do you
name.
mean he confessed to? He picked up the phone, or?
He did. He picked up the phone and called the police and said, I want to talk to a DA. And we drove 8 hours to some county up in the north and put him on videotape, and he confessed. Yeah, I know. And we Mirandized him too. We gave him all his rights, and he said, I'll still talk. I know, it's crazy. They used to call me and one of my colleagues the confession takers, because people would talk to us. I seem like a nice guy. I read the Miranda warnings. There's no chit chat. So I used to take statements from murder defendants and robbery defendants and police shooting defendants, everybody. And there's no chit chat. There's no walking in, hey, can I get you a cup of coffee like you see in the movies? Hey,
No,
how's your family? No,
nothing
I
like that.
walk in, I turn on the video, and I say, hi, I'm Jeremy Shockett, and I'm going to give you your constitutional rights. And then I read the rights, and I say, are you willing to talk to me? And they say yes, or they say no. It's very vanilla. It's very
Is it, do you see them kind of, once they confess, does it sort of like unleash? Does it help their psyche? Who knows, right?
I don't know. The guy who confessed to us about the murders, uh, my memory is that right after he went right to sleep. So I think he felt good. But I mean, they were heinous, and he was one of the scariest people I ever met. He looked us in the eyes. He had no emotion, nothing. It was blank, and he just described the murders, and it was chilling. And we had to like keep up the face.
Mark my words, in another 10, 20 years, it's all going to be that little lobe right there that's missing.
And by the way, it also might be the little lobe right there to prove if you did it or if you didn't.
That is
Forget
true.
the why you did it. They're just going to say, okay, did you do it or you didn't?
That is actually very true.
It could happen. I've
All
seen
right,
movies
so,
about it.
there's so many things I could ask you, but I I happen to know from talking to you before this interview that you're a pickleball player. And my
Mm.
final question to you is, from all your years of both defense and prosecution, and your strategies and your empathy and your grit, what do you bring to the pickleball court from that profession?
So my wife is going to laugh so hard if this question makes the cut. Uh, I, I'm very empathetic with my partners. Uh, I have yet to yell at a partner. I'm very supportive. They've yelled at me a couple times, but I, I I like to have a really good time, and I will. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. We have played together, Lisa and I, and I feel like I was very supportive and helpful, and I feel like we had a lot of fun and laughed throughout the whole time. So pickleball is a great sport. It's
Hey, but
great
that's
for.
but I also saw the ruthlessness as well. Come on.
Who, me? No, no, no,
I
no.
would not want to go up against you in court. That's all I can say. You strategized, you hit it in places only the most athletic could leap to. You were really calculating as to where you place things. I mean, I would hire you on the spot just based on your pickleball game.
I appreciate that. And others have. And others have.
Well, Jeremy, I'm sorry we didn't get to a million and one things you're involved in. Such a fascinating career, but I wish you all the best with all of your endeavors, and I'm going to be following you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Lisa, and best of luck. And I'm see you on the pickleball court soon.
Definitely. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.